Hi guys, you are tuned in to Pavi G and his latest video, and today we'll be discussing why I called the end of Wimbledon a very sad and dark day for Wimbledon after Jannik Sinner had lifted his first ever Wimbledon title yesterday. And I want to share with you those the reasons why I felt not only Jannik Sinner but also Igor Swiatek winning the women's Wimbledon was a sad day for tennis. So I'm going to try and go into the details as quickly as I can and try and cover some important aspects. If you haven't already done so, please like, share, subscribe on my YouTube channel. It's important that the message gets out. Obviously, you know, I'm just a very, very small keg in the world of media, and we all know that media at the moment, mainstream media, whether it be tennis or politics, is owned heavily by the big organisations, the establishment, as I so like to call them, and they condition what is actually going out. They send certain narratives which protect their own interests as opposed to getting the truth out there. So I want to kind of deep dive into kind of the Jannik Sinner and Igor Swiatek excuses that they provided when they failed their drug test. For those of you who followed me for a while, you know I've been all over this ever since the news broke out for Jannik Sinner. The news broke out at the end of August 2024. For Igor Swiatek, the news broke out a few months later, around November 2024. But I've been kind of on it since then because I feel that it is one of the biggest scandals that tennis has ever seen. So the rhetoric that we're currently getting at the moment is Sinner was cleared by independent hearings, numerous hearings. All of them found him completely innocent. That's the kind of narrative that they want to push, and let's move on, and he was treated exactly the same as any other player. Now that isn't the case. You know, that simply isn't true. Now, first of all, we need to kind of think about kind of the organization that is in charge of anti-doping within tennis, and it's the ITIA. Now the ITIA was set up independently of the ITF, which is the International Tennis Federation, which previously used to have a section which used to look after anti-doping. But in around 2021, 2022, it was decided that a separate unit needed to be built solely looking at anti-corruption in tennis. And that's when the ITIA was formed. Now, the most important bit about the ITIA, it is funded by the following: the ATP, the WTA, the ITF, on all of the Grand Slams. So it is funded solely by tennis. No external sources, no external bodies. It's not an independent entity, because you can't be independent if you are funded and resourced by tennis. Now, tennis, if we look at the ATP, has a lot of sponsors that also sponsors players. So let's take Rolex, for example. Rolex sponsors the majority of all of the Masters events that happen in tennis, which are the most lucrative product for the ATP. Rolex is also a primary sponsor of Jannik Sinner. So that is where some people might say there's a conflict of interest, but there's a connection. So when people say he's been cleared by all these independent sources, independent units, no, this is not right. This was done by ITIA. The ITIA conducted the hearings. They conducted the investigations. They did all of the tribunals. It was conducted solely by the ITIA. Now, what would have been independent would have been the Court Arbitration of Sport. Now, I'll go into this later, but a date had been set for Jannik Sinner to get his point across, and for WADA to also get their point across, and all of the details of the case would have been laid bare in front of an independent hearing, and a final result would have come within a couple of days, just like it did happen for Simona Halep. It wouldn't have been months or years. You know, the Court Arbitration of Sport know that people's sports livelihoods are at stake, so they promised to get an early decision. So that never happened. Now let's kind of, so that's the first bit I want to discuss really, is the fact when people say, oh, he's been cleared by all these hearings. He's been cleared by ITIA clearings. Now WADA used to be in charge of doping in tennis before the ITIF took it. So we're talking, you know, we're talking 20, 30 years ago when WADA was first set up. I believe it was around 1999 when WADA was set up. They kind of took in all of the sports and tennis was included. So when they passed it over to the ITF and then to the ITIA, they said, look, you know, all of the jurisdiction's yours. All the decision making is yours. We are telling you what to follow, what not to follow. But what we will do is we will kind of oversee all the decisions that you make, glance over it and make sure that nothing glaring has been missed. Now, the ITIA have been running for 3 years and they've been doing hundreds of cases, whether it be anti-doping or anti-corruption or anything that falls within their remit of something that's not quite right, that's not, you know, people aren't following the rules in tennis. Now, in all of those hundreds of cases, WADA have never, ever looked at a case and said, yeah, actually, there's something glaring here. This is something wrong. Now, the ITIA had cleared Jannik Sinner. They had cleared him in August and said, we're happy with what he provided us. We've done our investigations. He's clear. He's good to go. And they only gave him like a 3 or 4 day suspension. A 3 or 4 day suspension. This is the same ITIA that gave Simona Halep 4 years. That gave Tara Moore 18 months. That have given Stefano Battaglino, which is a really, really important case, 4 years. And the reason why Stefano Battaglino is so important is that he had exactly the same small amount of Clostebol as Jannik Sinner did. He, in fact, also provided the very same excuse, that it was transferred to him by a physio. Now, Stefano Battaglino doesn't have the resources of Jannik Sinner, and the physio that he said had transferred this Clostebol into his system through a massage was not part of his team. And this physio, he or she, said they don't want to be any part of any hearings. It's not in their remit, you know. So they said, yeah, we don't want to say anything. We don't get involved. So on that basis, Stefano Battaglino was banned for 4 years. Now, 4 years is the maximum ban. That is basically when someone thinks that, when the ITIA think that you are intentionally doping. So this is what they gave Stefano Battaglino. Stefano Battaglino then took his case to the Court Arbitration of Sport and said, you know, this is basically what happened. Here are the circumstances. They ruled the same as the ITIA and said, no, we think you're intentionally doping. We're going to keep that ban of 4 years. Okay, so you've got to think here, Stefano Battaglino was also Italian. He had the same performance-enhancing drug that Jannik Sinner had. This was just a few months before the Jannik Sinner case. Okay, and he provided the same excuse. Now, what are the odds of that happening? Because at that point, it was so close to each other, they wouldn't have even known, but they both gave the same excuse. So you have to ask yourself, is this something that has been conducted to say, you know, if you get caught doping, this is the excuse to provide? Because two of them to provide the exact same excuse should be alarm bells. What should be even more alarm bells is the ITIA believed Jannik Sinner and decided to give him a 3 or 4 day suspension, which they didn't even publicise. But with Stefano Battaglino, they gave him 4 years. Now, I'm slightly digressing there because let's pull it back to WADA. Now, WADA had a look at the Jannik Sinner case in September or early September when the decision came out. Now, it became public on the day that Jannik Sinner won the Cincinnati Open, which was towards the end of August. And he looked shocked on the final. He, you know, if you look back at his video that he did with Prakash Amritraj on the Tennis Channel, have a look at it, Google it. When he won the Cincinnati Masters, he looked shocked. He looked completely shocked. And even Prakash is just like, you've just won a Masters. What's going on? Jannik Sinner had just been told then that it was began to become public. So I do believe that either him or his team were aware that it was ever going to become public, and it was probably a whistleblower that actually made that go public. So that went public. So WADA then had a look at the case. They had 30 days to have a look at the case. They looked at the case, and for 30 days they asked for additional information. They looked at all the information and they said, the ITIA 3 or 4 day, this is nonsense. You know, there's 2 anti-doping offences that Jannik Sinner has committed, and they said whilst we can't prove that it was intentional, there's enough negligence in there because you're responsible ultimately for your team. And I'll tell you the excuses that Jannik kind of provided to why it got terminated, and WADA weren't having any of it, and they said no, we're going to take it to the Court of Arbitration of Sport, which is costly because it means you have to, first of all, you have to raise a legal team to kind of put your case forward. You have to take it to the Court of Arbitration of Sport. You then have to have an arbitrator. You then have to present all that information. It's a very, very costly exercise. But WADA felt that it was beneficial because they just said, no, you know, there's at least 2 anti-doping violations here. They wrote to the Court of Arbitration of Sport and they said that we are looking for Jannik Sinner to be banned for a minimum of 1 year up to 2 years. They said that the offences that he's committed, you know, should merit a ban of 1 to 2 years. They never said he was intentionally doping, which would have come to 4 years, but they never had the remit. You know, they never had the full investigation as the ITIA. They could only go on the 33-page report that the ITIA provided. Now let's go back to Jannik Sinner's excuse to why he failed 2 drug tests that were taken on March the 10th and March the 18th. Now these weren't A and B samples. These were 2 independent drug tests that were taken. He failed both of them. Very, very small amounts, but the amounts are quite inconsequential. If you speak to any expert, Luis Horta, an ex-Portuguese head of WADA, has said that clostebol is a really, really popular drug because A, it's difficult to detect. So sometimes when you detect, you can't detect it at all, or you can only detect small measures of it, which is why it is so popular with dopers. The other thing that he said was that you can actually use it as a masking agent. So it's actually something that is used to mask something more potent, but it's a form of anabolic steroid, and it's proven to provide extra strength and endurance and increase muscle mass, which is why it's prohibited, which is why it's a banned performance enhancing drug. Now Jannik Sinner excuse for this, bearing in mind he would have picked up the phone, someone would have picked up the phone and said, you've failed a drug test, okay? So in that mind, I know I've spoken to Tara Moore about when she found out with the drug test, and you know, her immediate thoughts was, oh my god, you know, and Tara Moore was latterly proved innocent, but it took her 18 months to do so. She was, I haven't got a clue what could it be, and you know, it turned out eventually when they found out that it was a type of meat that she had in South America, which was being was quite common to show that it had a performance enhancing substance in there, but it was not intentional, and there was quite a few cases in there. But your first kind of mind, if someone tells you, if you're innocent and someone tells you you failed a drug test, you would think, whoa, is it something I've ingested? Is it something, is it a medicine? Is it a supplement? Where have I eaten? You know, your mind kind of goes all over the place. But Jannik Sinner said, and he said this on video, as Darren Cahill, that within 5 minutes he knew where the source had come from. Within 5 minutes. So he was very, very confident, even though he hadn't ingested it, that he had a massage from his physio, and that is how he got contaminated. You know, okay. So if you think that's far-fetched, listen to the actual story. So the physio is one of the leading sports physios in the entire world. You know, Jannik Sinner is world #1 tennis player. He is on a contract with Nike that he signed 3 years ago, £158 million sponsorship deal, dollars, 158 million, okay, plus all his prize money, plus all his other sponsors. He's going to get the best of the best to make sure he stays at the top. He's under pressure to stay at the top. So Giacomo Naldi is one of the best physios in Italy. Sinner decides to take him on board. Now, as a physio, one of your main jobs to look after a tennis player, it kind of the main 3 things that you do on a day-to-day basis, they're going to have muscular injuries, they're going to have blisters, but they're going to have cuts and grazes. You know, they're going to be running around, jumping around, they're going to have falls. So you would think as a physio, you would know automatically what to do if you have a cut, because that's what you're paid to do. Now, in this instance, Giacomo Naldi has said that in his physio bag, he left an open scalpel. Okay, that's the first red flag. I mean, which physio, one of the world's best physio, leaves an open scalpel in their physio bag? Okay, you've got to think, is this, what is this guy on? So he apparently cut this, okay, and his little pinky finger cut, and he had a tiny little plaster which was all shown. There's a very number of video close-ups there. It was almost like it was kind of contrived, for me. It just looked a bit suspicious. So he puts a plaster on it like anyone else does. How many people have had cuts on their fingers and hands over the years? And you put a plaster on, normal person will put a plaster on. Now, there's two things with a bleed. You would either put a plaster on and it settles 4 or 5 days and you carry on with your normal life. There's nothing bad. Now, sometimes those cuts can be quite bad. They can be quite deep. And you think, okay, well, actually, this is quite deep. I might need a little bit of further attention. So you might go to your GP or your healthcare provider and say, I've got a bit more of a cut. Do you think, it may merit stitches? Okay, so those are the two things. You either have a plaster or you have stitches if it's a really bad cut. And you might take some medicine to avoid in getting it infected or whatever. But Giacomo Naldi apparently went to Yannick Sinner's head of anti-doping controls. Now, I'm going to say that. Yannick Sinner's physio went to his anti-doping control. Now, this is Umberto Ferreira. He's also a pharmacist. And if you don't believe me, you can have a look at the ATP promotion. But he was also designated as the person to ensure that everything that Yannick Sinner takes, ingests, medicines, supplements, food, is in no way, shape or form going to get him in trouble with failing a drugs test. He's a pharmacist. He's a qualified pharmacist, so it would be a perfect role, you would think. Okay, so that's his job. He's paid a lot of money to make sure that everything that Yannick Sinner does is to make sure that he would never ever get contaminated. He would never ever get fail a drugs test for recklessness. Now, Giacomo Naldi apparently went up to Umberto Ferreira and said, I've got a cut finger. I'm a bit concerned. Even though he's a pharmacist, is there anything that you've got for me? Now, Umberto Ferreira says, yeah, I just have the right spray. I've got a spray called Trofodermin, which is used in Italy, which is used for sprays. Okay, here you go. You can have my spray. He also had the very small and important caveat. By the way, this has got clostebol in it, which is a banned performance enhancing substance, and they know that it's banned because it's written in capital letters as a big red warning mark to say that, if anyone is using this who is an athlete, this is going to be against anti-doping. They know this in Italy because there's a problem with clostebol in Italy, with a number of Italian athletes having been caught for doping using this particular substance. So he decides to tell Giacomo Naldi that I've got this substance, but it's got a banned substance in there, but it will sort out your little pinky finger. Now, Umberto Ferreira at this point knows that Giacomo Naldi is massaging Yannick Sinner every single day. He's in the middle of a tournament. He's warming down. He is basically massaging him every single day. Yet he gives him this spray. So first of all, the alarm bells are ringing there because this spray is a controlled substance in the US. When he would have gone through customs, Umberto Ferreira had to declare that he had a prescribed spray and what it was used for, and if it was okayed, I don't even think this was declared at the US customs, they would have said to him, only you can use this spray, no one else, only you, if you are prescribed for it, no one else. So he's already infringing US custom laws there. Okay, so what he's doing is completely out of the zone. He then tells Giacomo Naldi not to tell anyone that he's using it, and to only use it in his personal bathroom. So it's almost like Umberto Ferreira knows this is not right. He's been paid to look after Yannick Sinner's head of doping, but he goes ahead and tells Giacomo Naldi that this is this is fine. This is what you should do. Now, if you're not at this point, 20 minutes in the video, sitting there or standing there going, what the hell? How have they got away with this? It gets even better. It gets even better. So Giacomo Naldi is a trained physio. He's a healthcare professional, one of the most elite healthcare professionals of his profession. He then applies the spray on an open wound, keeps the wound open, and decides to massage Jannik Sinner, who has known lesions. Okay, so this is the most basic of healthcare practices. If you have an open wound, you have to take precautions when you're dealing with your clients or anyone. Giacomo Naldi didn't use any protective gloves. In fact, in the report, he said he didn't even remember if he washed his hands or not. So, you've got not only cross-contamination, you've got infection, blood infection worries here, septicemia. There could be a whole health and reasons. If this is the story that they want to go with, there's huge red flags here, okay? He then apparently massaged Jannik Sinner for 8 days consecutively, because this was their story, because they had a test 8 days afterwards and they were saying, oh, he was still using that cream. 8 days. What kind of spray is this where 8 days it doesn't do what it's supposed to do on the tin? Wouldn't you ask yourself what's going on here? Wouldn't you, it beyond unbelievable, for me. And then they're in the US, so they've got access to private healthcare facilities on site. They're in Miami and Indian Wells. Some of the best facilities are available and accessible to them. So they're not in a third world country where they can only use the spray, and it's a pinky finger. It's a pinky finger. So that is the story that they provided. Now, the red flags already in that is, this story was provided almost immediately. Okay, it was provided almost immediately. Now, you're thinking here that you've got an experienced pharmacist who is basically giving a product that he knows is banned to his physio, who is then massaging Jannik Sinner, and this physio is then basically doing so without even taking any appropriate precautions. So there's a lot of red flags there. Okay, now this is the story that they provided. Now, I'm not interested in what all the hearings have said and all that, and they've cleared. This is what the hearings would have seen, and this is what would have said. Now, more red flags is the ITIA, let's go back to the hearing now, didn't even ask for a hair sample of Jannik Sinner, or they did and it was rejected. But on the report, there is nothing written about this. Now, the reason why a hair sample is important is it can give you evidence of whether this is being used regularly. So it's a really, really important thing. The other thing they never did is ask for bank statements of Giacomo Naldi and Umberto Ferreira. Because you're thinking, well, Jannik Sinner, you pay these people, so you are essentially their boss. And you are essentially saying that none of the blame is yours, but it's to two of your people that you employ. And they're saying that they did all of it wrong. It was nothing to do with Jannik Sinner. Fine, well, get their bank statements. Let's have a look. Have they had any big payments that have come in? Have they any big payments since? And they can do this because I know that they have the power to take the phone of people. They've taken it of Quintain Follett, a young French player who's been under suspicion of fixing a match, which he vehemently denies, and that case is still currently ongoing. But they had the power to do that, and they decided not to. They were like, okay, fine, we listened to your story, and we think that sounds a plausible story, is basically what they've said. During this whole time, Jannik was allowed to keep on playing. It was kept secret. So, previously the ITF had said that if anyone had failed a drug test, and this stemmed from a book that Andre Agassi wrote, and he said in 1997 he was actually banned from playing tennis for taking crystal meth, but it was a silent ban. It was a silent ban, so no one knew about it. Okay, so he could have just said, I'm injured or I've got personal issues or whatever, but he was actually banned for failing a drugs test. So the ITF a few years ago have said, to stop anything like that happening, as soon as someone fails a drug test, whether it's whoever it is, it should be made public. The ITA decided that they didn't want to follow that path, so they kept it quiet, and Jannik Sinner was allowed to keep on playing and keep on accumulating trophy after trophy. So that is the excuse that Jannik Sinner provided, that WADA had initially said, we don't buy that. We're going to go to the Court Arbitration of Sport. The Court Arbitration of Sport, to have a look at the case, would have had to have looked at the evidence that WADA had to why they were challenging the ITIA. It's similar to kind of a Crown Prosecution Service in the UK. If police charge someone, it will go to the Crown Prosecution Service, and they will give them advice to whether it's strong enough to go to trial or not. The Court Arbitration of Sport felt that the WADA information that they provided them was strong enough. A date was set for April the 16th, 2025, to look at all the information independently. You know, the Court Arbitration of Sport aren't funded in tennis by any way, shape or form. It's an independent forum. They have independent arbitrators from all over the world. And they'll scrutinise against the highest sports court in the law. So, you know, they have a number of anti-corruption checks. They are very, very thorough in what they do. Now, that date was approaching. Just a few months away, and Jannik Sinner had said that he was happy to go ahead and pull that case to the Court Arbitration of Sport. But lo and behold, just after the Australian Open, we had news that Jannik Sinner had agreed a settlement with WADA. So WADA, who had paid all this money to the Court Arbitration of Sport, got their case ready, had asked for a minimum of 1 year, decided suddenly that they would take a 3-month ban. Now, that 3-month ban just ended a few days before the biggest ATP title and tournament for Jannik Sinner, which was the Rome Open. Obviously, he's Italian, so that was very, very important for him. More important for him is he wouldn't miss a single slam. Now, if you compare that to Simona Halep, who had to wait 18 months before she got her case heard, and she was banned in that time, it was made public. She was also fined not to have intentionally doped, 18 months. Tara Moore, 18 months. Stefano Battaglino with almost an identical case as Jannik Sinner, 4 years. Max Purcell, who took too much vitamins when he was poorly on an IV drip, has been banned for over a year. Dan Evans banned over a year. Nicholas Jarry banned for 11 months. Beatrix Haddad-Maia banned for 11 months. These two, Jarry and Haddad-Maia, were also found not to have doped intentionally, but they're pretty much facing bans of almost a year. The ITIA gave Jannik Sinner a few days, which was bunked up to 3 months in between slams and tournaments, where Jannik Sinner would probably have would have played 1 or 2, and he wouldn't have missed a single slam. Okay, so that's kind of Jannik Sinner's case on here as well. Now, I also want to kind of, it's not just Jannik Sinner, you know, it's also Igor Swiatek. But I'm mindful of the time. It's already taken half an hour to kind of go through Jannik Sinner's cases, and I think that the Igor Swiatek case and the excuses provided and the red flags also merits a separate video, because there's a lot more information into that one as well. I think, having studied both of the cases, you know, I think both of them should have been banned for a minimum of a year. I think the Jannik Sinner red flags are more damning than the Igor Swiatek. Doesn't mean that Igor Swiatek doesn't have red flags. I believe there was, but certain things like, you know, the ITIA did ask for a hair sample for Igor Swiatek, so slightly different circumstances. But that is why I feel that everything that's happened with his case, and all we now get is gaslighting, we get propaganda, we get establishment shills. Now, establishment shills are people, prominent people that work for big organisations. They will never admit it, but they know that they have to toe the line and follow the narratives. Otherwise, they will lose job opportunities. So they may see and read something and think, don't agree with that. They know that if they speak up and say that publicly and it doesn't go in line with what they're told to do, they won't be getting called back for future job opportunities. So it comes down to your basic Maslow hierarchy of needs, of having basic demands of food and water and feeding your loved ones and yourself against your morals and principles. And that is the big problem that we have in Western journalism, whether it's politics or tennis. We have journalists now that are tied in to the establishment, and they will simply push their narratives as opposed to try and go out and seek the truth. Now, in the last couple of days, I've been really heartened, particularly with Oliver Holt, who's one of the UK's leading sports journalists. He's a chief correspondent of a number of newspapers. He's currently working for the Daily Mail. He has over 400,000 followers. He's a big name. He has been looking into this case, and he called it out, and he also said that it's absolutely shocking that both Sinner and Swiatek won Wimbledon. It's a really, really bad look in tennis in view of what they've kind of done and you know, how they have kind of got through. Now, from the very day one, I've never ever said that Swiatek and Sinner have intentionally doped. Not once. And if I thought they were intentionally doped, then they would be looking at a 4-year maximum ban. Now, I don't know the circumstances about that, but I know that there's enough negligence from Sinner and or his team, who he's ultimately responsible for, which merited a much longer ban, just as we've seen for other players as well. And I feel that he's been protected because there's so much money that has gone into Jannik Sinner. He's on a 10-year deal at the moment with Nike, which was signed towards the end of 2022. If that kind of was cut short, in 3 years, there's going to be a lot of people that lose a lot of money. So there's a lot of powerful entities in play, but I just really wanted to kind of give you a bit more information regarding the kind of excuse provided by Jannik Sinner and how it kind of evolved with, you know, WADA changing their mind, how a date was set with the Court Arbitration of Sport. If it went to the Court Arbitration of Sport, I believe the truth would have been found. And I would have been absolutely happy. And if they said, look, no, actually, Jannik Sinner is, you know, he's been treated fairly, I would have been okay with that, because I knew the Court Arbitration of Sport would have looked at everything with a lot more information, and I believe that they're independent, so I wouldn't have had an issue with that. But Jannik Sinner said, no, you know, they cut a deal with WADA. His excuse was for not going to Court Arbitration of Sport, because ultimately he could have proved himself innocent there, was that he felt that it was going to take too much time. And if you look at all of the Court Arbitration of Sports decisions in tennis, they're done within days. It's getting the date that takes the long time. So he already had that date. So I don't feel that's a good enough reason. So that is why I don't feel, along with Oliver Holt, along with Oliver Brown, he's a sports writer for the Telegraph as well. He's recently award-winning. So it's not just me. It's not just someone who's me and people think, oh, I'm worried that Sinner's going to take, you know, prevent Djokovic from winning titles. You know, Djokovic is 38. You know, I said at the time when he won his 23rd Grand Slam, if he doesn't win any more titles from there, I was absolutely content. I was happy. You know, since then he's won another Slam, he's won Olympics, he's won another title. You know, it doesn't bother me. Djokovic isn't going to go and keep playing on for, you know, regardless of whether I support him or not. More important things for me than Novak Djokovic, sorry Novak, is the integrity of the sport that I love, and the sport that gives me so much both on and off the court, which has done for many, many years. So, you know, long before I supported Djokovic, I was talking about corruption in tennis. So this is not absolutely nothing to do with Novak Djokovic. Novak Djokovic turned around and said, you know, I don't, you know, I'm fully behind Jannik, and you know, I think, you know, that he was dealt with correctly. I'll be like, fine. But, you know, my investigation, my due diligence would say otherwise, because, you know, this is important for me. This is more than a player. This is about the whole sport, and it's about the future of the sport. So, you know, it's very, very important to me that there is a voice, that someone can speak up, and you know, will not get intimidated by people telling me to shut up, or, you know, with threats. And because, you know, how I've been brought up, and you know, everything that I do, my faith, it will always tell me to speak up against things that aren't right. And, you know, I will particularly do that for things that I'm passionate with. You know, I'd love to do that with everything in the world, but you just can't do that, because there's so many wrongs in the world that you can't do everything But what I can do is something that I'm involved in, which is tennis. You know, it's a big part of my life. So that is something that I can't simply stand away and walk away when I believe a big injustice has been done. So for those of you who made it to the end of 35 minutes, thank you. Can I ask that you please like, share and subscribe, and you know, no doubt this will get a whole heap of abuse from the paid bots, a lot of racism and a lot of you know, threats and what have you, but that's part and parcel. You know, that kind of gives you an idea that you're getting closer to the truth. And I do think the truth will be found sooner rather than later. There's a number of red flags, you know, even leading into Wimbledon with Sinner, his new fitness trainer and his new physio suddenly leaving on the eve of Wimbledon, would suggest to me that something big has happened. But we will probably never find out, because a lot of these people from his ex-team would have signed NDAs, and they would probably be sued for everything that they've got if they broke those NDAs. So I don't think that's going to happen, but there we are. Right, so everyone, I hope that kind of gives a bit more context to you, to why I'm so passionate about this particular case. Wish you all the very best. You know, as I said, apart from the final two outcomes, I thought it was a good Wimbledon. I enjoyed it. I managed to get down a couple of times. You know, it's still a very special tournament to me, and that's why I'm so passionate about it. I want to make sure that it stays a tournament that is of integrity and morals. So wherever you are, enjoy yourself. Don't get too stressed out about things. You know, things will eventually come out in the open, and those of you who disagree with me, all I ask for you is to look at the facts independently and make up your own decision. And if you still feel that your decision and your thoughts are what they are, then that is absolutely fine. We are in a democracy and everyone has got the freedom of speech and freedom of opinion. So wherever you are, good night, God bless. I'll speak to you soon. Take care.